Okay, welcome to episode 70 of the Apple podcast by Lex at maxfuture.com. And this is May 6, 2011. And it's been another interesting week in Apple world. So let's talk about some Apple-related stuff. I think the most significant thing that happened this week was that the iMacs got updated on May 3rd, Tuesday, May 3rd. And it wasn't done with a lot of fanfare. There had been rumors that Apple was going to update the iMacs very soon, and rumors that it was going to happen on Tuesday, May 3rd. And sure enough, in the morning of May 3rd, Apple's online store was down, and shortly thereafter, around 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, new iMacs appeared. So there was no, big announcement. There was no live show. There were no reporters invited, but it was a significant upgrade. And I'll give you an overview. The key things. The key things are that the new iMacs have Thunderbolt connections, which provide for up to 10 gigabytes per second data connections. Now, the models also support FireWire 800 ports. They also have 4 USB 2.0 ports and Gigabit Ethernet ports and audio line in and out ports. So the big thing here is that, like the MacBook Pros, which were the first Mac product or any Apple product to get the Thunderbolt technology, the iMacs now have Thunderbolt technology. And Thunderbolt technology is also known as Lightspeed. The technology was really pioneered by Intel, and Intel collaborated with Apple, but it's a somewhat revolutionary new connection because Thunderbolt, if you want to call it, or Lightspeed, allows much higher and faster data connections between Apple's Macs, or any computer and an external device. But it can also do a lot of things. It's very flexible. It also can be used to run an external monitor. So, and you can daisy chain devices on one Lightspeed or Thunderbolt connection. And, you're going to see it probably across the entire Mac lineup. The MacBook Pros, which were MacBook Pros, which were introduced about a month ago, all have Thunderbolt connections, and now the iMacs do. So the next computers to probably get them are going to be the MacBook Airs, and then the Mac Pros, and then maybe the Mac Mini. Now, basically, the iMacs come in two size models: the 21.5-inch screen and the 27-inch screen. So it's not really changed from last year's models, which were also in the two sizes. And in terms of Thunderbolt connections, the 21.5-inch computer iMac has only one Thunderbolt connection, while the 27-inch ones have two Thunderbolt connections. So now, as a practical matter, having Thunderbolt isn't going to mean much today, because there's not many things that externally, use Thunderbolt. So there aren't a lot of hard drive choices out there that use Thunderbolt. And a typical traditional hard drive, like that spins at 7,200 RPM, they really can't take advantage of the immense gigabit speed or 10 gigabit speed of Thunderbolt. Now, what is 10 gigabit speed? Well, to give you a sense, it's all about how much data you can shuttle in and out of a computer. What a lot of people don't realize is the real speed of a computer isn't just the processor. It's the ability to shuttle in information and quickly process it and get it out. If you have a lag anywhere in that chain of data to processor, you can get slow results. And one of the slowest areas of, the things that slow computers down are the hard drives, because the hard drives can't spit out data as fast as the processor can handle it. So you can have an incredible, fast processor in your Mac, but it's not going to seem that zippy if your hard drive is slow. Now, traditional hard drives, one way to make them faster is to have them be 10,000 RPM instead of 7,200 RPM, and have them be 7,200 RPM instead of 5,400 RPM. But to give you a sense of the data speed, you're lucky when you have inside your iMac a regular hard drive. Now that spins at 7,200 RPM, and you're lucky if you can get, I don't know, 80 megabytes per second read-write. So think of that, 80 megabytes per second compared to 10 gigabytes per second read or write. And what Thunderbolt has is the potential to have other types of drives externally in the future that can read and write into the computer at speeds far beyond what your current hard drive, even internally, is communicating. Now, I did some tests, and if I use like USB connection to a hard drive externally and I have a 2010 iMac, I'm getting like, I don't know, 20, 30 megabytes per second read-write. If I use a FireWire 800 connection with a regular hard drive, I'm getting maybe, I don't know, 50, 60, 70. The reason I'm getting, like with a regular hard drive, like 80 or so internally is because internally the connection to the hard drive internally is what's known as a SATA port, SATA. And that SATA port can handle speeds much faster than FireWire 800 or USB. But SATA is not as fast as Thunderbolt. SATA, I think, I'll get to SATA, but historically SATA was, if you were lucky to get to like 250 megabytes per second, which is still a fraction of getting to what Thunderbolt can get. So one of the advantages of getting one of the newer 2011 iMacs is because you'll have this Thunderbolt, it's going to be future-proof in some sense. It's very likely in the coming year you're going to see all sorts of great devices that are going to be able to connect by Thunderbolt. Now it does maintain the other ports, so you're still going to have a display port. The Thunderbolt connection with an adapter can be a display port connection. Now, one downside of having a Thunderbolt port instead of a regular display port, now you can use display port monitors with the Thunderbolt connection using an adapter, but one downside of the 2011 iMacs compared to the 2010 iMacs is the 2010 iMacs, you could use your iMac, your 27-inch iMac only, as a monitor for something externally. In other words, not as a computer, but if you had like an Xbox or a Sony PlayStation, you could connect that to the iMac to 27-inch, and through the display port, it would turn the iMac into a monitor for the Xbox. Well, you can and cannot do that with the new iMacs. With the new iMacs, that sort of reverse monitor working of the iMac, and this is true for either an iMac 27-inch or a 21.5-inch, you can do that reverse mirroring only through some other device that has Thunderbolt. So currently the MacBook Pros have Thunderbolt. So as soon as someone comes out with a Thunderbolt cable, Thunderbolt to Thunderbolt, if you have a MacBook Pro, a new one, you'll be able to use your 27-inch or 21.5-inch 2011 iMac as a second monitor for your MacBook Pro. Now that might be kind of extravagant, but the concept is that you'll be able to use your new iMac as a monitor. However, it won't work through DisplayPort. Oh, I'm sorry. The iMac does have a DisplayPort connector, but the DisplayPort connector does not support this reverse monitor thing. So in other words, the 2010 has a DisplayPort connection that does allow it to be a monitor, but and there are cables right now that are like HDMI to DisplayPort that you could use to make your Xbox Connect and use a 27-inch 2010 iMac. So that's one significant difference. Another difference is that the new iMacs have a new camera in it that's supposed to be FaceTime HD compliant, which means it supports taking video up to 2560 by 1600 pixels. Personally, that's such a big deal for me. I don't really request, I don't really need high definition video taking from the camera in my computer. I can hook up another camera and take a movie. Another big difference is that these new iMacs have Intel's latest processors, which are Sandy Bridge processors. So one significant difference is that all models of the 21.5-inch and all models of the 27-inch are now quad-core processors and a minimum of i5 processors. So this is pretty significant because I think with last year's model, you weren't guaranteed a quad-core iMac. The lower-end iMacs were dual-core. Dual-core, I think, started off at i3 and then dual-core i5, and then the only quad-core, I think, was the i7. So that's a big change, and all models now have 6 megabytes on chip shared L3, but the bus speed does not appear to have changed between last year's model and this year's model. It's still 1,333 megahertz, and it uses DDR3 memory. It looks like you can use the same memory in your 2010 iMac in your 2011 iMac. Now the speeds of the iMacs are greatly improved. Let me strike that. It's not greatly improved. It looks like the number that it can go up to is much higher than last year's model. Okay, so on the low end, the base model, 21.5-inch one, the low end, it starts off at 2.5 gigahertz quad-core Core i5 processor. So that is, I think, a significant boost. I think last year it was like only 2.2 gigahertz or 2.3 gigahertz, and it was a dual-core i3, I believe, was the base processor. So that's, you're going to see a significant boost. And that model, without any sort of discount, is $1,199. You get a 500 gigabyte drive with that and 4 gigabytes of memory. Now, the step up from that in terms of the 21.5-inch iMac at $1,499 is a 2.7 gigahertz quad-core Intel Core i5 processor, and you get a terabyte hard drive. And then you go up to the 27-inch. It comes in 2 tiers. These are without any configuration. The 27-inch, the first tier is at $1,699. You can see there are intervals of increases in price, and that's a 2.7 gigahertz i5 also. So you'd get the same processor, but like a bigger screen. So essentially, you're getting a bigger screen than the 21.5-inch, $1,499. So for $200, you're essentially getting a 27-inch screen instead of a 21.5-inch screen. And then if you go to the top end of the 27-inch, you can get a 3.1 gigahertz quad-core Intel Core i5 processor, and that's $1,999. So for $300 more, you get a somewhat faster processor. Now here's where it gets interesting, though. You can upgrade your high-end your 27-inch iMac to a Core i7 processor, which was the top-end processor last year on the 2010 model. And that one has a 3.4 gigahertz quad-core Intel Core i7. But you have to order that. You won't find that in the store. You have to configure that on Apple's website. Now, last year, the high-end, the most powerful processor you could put in last year's 2010 iMac was a quad-core Intel Core i7 processor that ran at 2.93 gigahertz. So that high end is going from 2.93 gigahertz to 3.4 gigahertz. But what's interesting is all of these quad-core processors have something called Turbo Boost 2.0. What that means is if a program's not using all 4 quad cores, this Turbo Boost technology allows the Mac to boost the speed of a particular core that the software is using. And Apple says it can be boosted up to 3.8 gigahertz. But if you really want power, the only processor that gives you something called hyper-threading is the Core i7. So to get that, that's going to cost you another $200 to upgrade. So if you get the highest end processor, and you can do this upgrade also with the 21.5-inch iMac. Last year you could only get the quad-core i7 processor in the 27-inch iMac, and this year they're giving you that as an upgrade also in the 21.5-inch iMac. And if you get that, you get hyper-threading. And what hyper-threading does is it turns the 4 cores into 8 virtual cores. So if you have a program that can run on many different cores, it can go to 8. So that's the significant change. Now, what's interesting is someone did benchmark tests, and I have a last year 2010 2.93 quad-core i7 processor. It's the fastest processor you can get in an iMac, and that's pretty much not that different in speed than the non-configured high-end 27-inch 2011 iMac. This is the one that's 3.1 gigahertz using a quad-core i5 processor. The benchmark shows that it wasn't that much faster. It was almost the same as mine. So the one that's going to be faster than mine is if somebody gets the new quad-core i7 in the new iMac. That'll be faster. So that's the those are the processor changes. And let's see, there's other changes. The other change is that the video cards are now upgraded to AMD's latest video cards, and you can in the 27-inch iMac you can get it with 1 gigabyte, or you can go all the way up to 2 gigabytes of RAM, video RAM, and this is in the HD 6970M model. You definitely can get that in the high-end 27-inch. It's only really available in the high-end 27-inch. It's not available in the 21.5-inch. So in the 27-inch, if you add that and you add in the i7 quad-core, and you don't add any memory or anything, you just upgrade the RAM, then you're looking at a price tag of $2,299. So, now the fourth change that is different, and this is significant, I think, is that, well, it comes in 2 parts. First, for the first time, you can get SSD drives as a second drive in the 21.5-inch iMac. Last year, they only offered the ability to put a second drive in to the 27-inch iMacs. And so now you have that ability in a 21.5-inch. And really, if you really are looking for speed improvement, the way to do it is to put an SSD drive into your computer. And let me tell you a little more about that, because that area has gotten really intriguing here. Okay, so in a high-end, with the iMac, the 27-inch one, you have now the option, like you did last year, of getting a 256 gigabyte solid-state drive, either to replace the 1 terabyte drive. Actually, last year, you didn't have the choice to replace the 1 terabyte regular ATA drive. You had the choice to supplement it with the second drive. This year, they're giving you the choice to just replace the hard drive and get only an SSD drive, 256 gigabytes for nothing, for $500. And they also give you the choice of upgrading the 1 terabyte hard drive to have the SSD drive of 256 gigabytes for $600 more, or to upgrade to 2 terabytes of ATA drive and the solid state drive for $750. Now, on the 21.5-inch iMac, you only get the option to put in the second SSD drive or get an SSD drive on the higher priced 21.5-inch iMac model. And there the prices are the same. You can just get an SSD drive and have no hard drive for $500 addition, or you can supplement that additional SSD drive to either a 1 terabyte ATA drive or a 2 terabyte ATA drive. And if you can come up with the money, I would definitely go with an extra SSD drive and put the operating system, because everyone is reporting that the speeds and the responsiveness of the computer you use is so much improved by having an SSD drive be where you have your operating system. And for example, if you've gone at all and tried out the MacBook Air at an Apple store, you'll see how incredibly quick it is to boot and to boot applications. And the MacBook Air has a much less powerful processor than this iMac or even last generation's iMac. The MacBook Airs run on Core Duo processors, which are like an older generation from the i7, i5, and i3 and Sandy Bridge. But here's what's interesting. If you're really into getting an SSD drive, you should pay attention to this, which is the technology for the SATA connection that connects an SSD drive to the Mac has been recently improved. Intel has recently upgraded the chipset. And what is the SATA connection? Well, the SATA connection internally in your Mac is what connects an internal hard drive or even the DVD player to your Mac. Now, last year's Macs had eSATA II technology, which had a connection speed to hard drives or to any drives known as 3G. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that you could connect up an SSD drive that was 3G compliant to an eSATA port in your Mac and get 3G speeds out of the SSD drive. And 3G speeds out of an SSD drive are like something like, 250 megabytes per second. And so if you got like last year an iMac and put an SSD drive in it, you would get SSD read and write speeds of 221 or 230 megabytes per second, which is still incredibly faster than what you get in the typical hard drive internally. The hard drive internally, even if you have a 7200 RPM hard drive, you're getting like 80 megabytes per second read and write. So you're really almost tripling the read-write speeds. And that tripling of speeds is what makes booting applications and your computer feel much zippier. So in other words, giving you a boost that's even greater than what you would get from having a fast processor. Because, the processor's only half the story. Now, but here's what's interesting. When the MacBook Pros came out about a month ago, people noticed that the new internal chipset from Intel is a new chipset that can do cool things, and including it's got Sata III technology, which means it can connect at 6G speeds. So 6G speeds are much faster and can handle something like 550 megabytes per second. Well, the third-party vendor Otherworld Computer, after the MacBook Pros came out, it has a business of selling SSD drives that people can install into their MacBook Pros, but also OWC has had a turnkey system since last summer with the 2010 iMacs where you could ship your iMac to them and they would install an SSD drive into your 27-inch iMac in lieu of Apple putting one in. And the advantage there was they could put in a cheaper, let's say smaller SSD drive if you couldn't afford Apple's price for a $500 or $600 SSD drive. And Otherworld Computer announced like recently that they have SSD drives that are 6G compliant, which means that the SSD drive, those SSD drives can read and write at speeds of 550 megabytes per second, but only if they're connected to an eSATA or a SATA connection that's Sata III and can handle 6G connection. Well, the MacBook Pros were up till this week the only Macs that had that 6G speed. And then when the iMacs came out on Tuesday, a lot of people were upset because it looked like, if you looked in the system profiler, it looked like the iMac 2011s did not have this new technology in. That even though they had this Intel chipset that allows 6G, that Apple had not turned it on and had maybe throttled it so that you would only get 3G speed. Well, yesterday, like a few days after the iMac first went on sale, Apple released a firmware upgrade for the new iMacs, the 2011 iMacs. And Otherworld Computing and other people following this issue realized that the firmware upgrade freed and released the capabilities of the SATA connections in the 2011 iMacs to now run at 6G speeds. Now, this has profound implications because it means that you can put in an SSD drive that runs at 550 megabytes per second read and write, which is incredibly fast. So imagine how fast that is. That's like, wow, that's like, I don't know, if a regular hard drive internally reads and writes at 60 or 70, megabytes per second, 550 would be like 8 or 9 times faster. So it's huge improvement. But here's the problem. Apple won't tell you if you order the 2011 if you order the 2011 iMac, the 27-inch or the 21-inch, and put in an SSD, Apple won't tell you if they're putting in an SSD drive that can take advantage of the technology that they have in there, which is the 6G technology. And what makes it really frustrating is currently, if you order a 2011 iMac and configure it with an SSD drive, Apple changes the shipping time of the order to 4 to 6 weeks. So we're not going to see people getting an Apple configured iMac with SSD drives for about a month. And then someone will tear it down and reveal what kind of SSD drives they have in there. So today I contacted Apple first through a chat with an Apple representative. He seemed very confused and didn't even understand the whole SATA 6G technology and connection. Finally, he referred me to an expert who would help me on the phone. And the expert at first was unaware of this, and he came back after a long time and said, Apple can't release that information. They can't tell you what kind of SSD drive, is being put in the iMacs, the 2011 iMacs. So this is really frustrating because I'm thinking of selling my 2010 iMac that, obviously had a little bit of a discount and loss, and getting the 2011 iMac. And I want to get the SSD drive. Now, if Apple is not going to put in a 6G compliant SSD drive, then I will ship from Apple to OWC my iMac and have OWC put in a 6G compliant SSD drive. They make one that's about 250 gigabytes in size. That's about, not that much more expensive. I think it's like $500 or $600 from a 3G compliant SSD drive. But I prefer to have Apple put it in it, because if I send it to OWC, then really I'm going to have to get a warranty from OWC and not from Apple. And I'd rather have Apple fixing any problems in my iMac in the future and not OWC. But how will I know? How will I know what to do? So my choices are: buy a 2010 11 iMac now without an SSD drive in it, ship it to OWC and have them put it in it, or wait and see what Apple does and see what people report in the next month as to what Apple is shipping with their iMacs, what kind of SSD. If anybody at Apple is hearing this, it would be a real shame for Apple to have this wonderful 6G SATA connection internally in the new iMacs, but not take advantage of it, because it's a huge, huge leap forward. Okay, another leap forward is that now you can order an iMac and not be forced to take a Magic Mouse or a mouse of any kind when you really want the Magic Trackpad. Now, last year I ordered the 2010 iMac, and I only wanted a Magic Trackpad. I didn't want to order the mouse. And so there was no option. The mouse came standard with the iMac along with the keyboard, and if you wanted the Magic Trackpad, you couldn't swap it out with the mouse. You had to get the mouse and pay extra. I think it was like $69 for the Magic Trackpad. Well, to show you the ascendancy of the Magic Trackpad and how it's the future of Mac, inputting and controlling, Apple now gives you the option not to get the mouse of any kind and to get a Magic Trackpad at no extra cost. So this is a huge signal that Apple really views the Magic Trackpad and the touch technology as the future of the Mac. Touch technology is not just for iOS devices. And the Magic Trackpad is particularly going to be useful for Apple's next operating system, Lion. Now, I've got Lion Beta because I downloaded it through the developers program, but I'm not going to report on what I have experienced with it, because I want to honor the agreement that I made with Apple when I downloaded it. But other sites are reporting that Lion has a lot of good use for touch inputting through the Magic Trackpad. Now, I use the Magic Trackpad with Snow Leopard, and I love it. I mean, I do have another mouse that I use every now and then, a Magic Mouse. But I got to tell you, for most use on the computer, I use the trackpad, particularly when you're just doing things like web browsing or moving about your computer. It's just so quick moving, and easy on your hand to just sort of brush your fingers back and forth on the Magic Trackpad. Plus, I've gotten really into the different finger commands that you can do with 1 finger, 2 finger, 3 finger, 4 finger. For example, you can configure the settings and on the Mac in settings so that with 3 fingers you drag something on the screen. You drag it a window. So before you'd have to click and hold on the mouse, you can just navigate with 1 finger to a window, and where your pointer is on the bar of the window, you put 3 fingers down, and just by having 3 fingers down, you can now drag the window. Similarly, I really like the 4-finger swipe. With 4-finger swipe in one direction, it's like expose. Suddenly all the windows scatter and you can see what windows you have open. But if you also go 4 fingers left, right, it pops up this sort of slider overlay window that shows you what apps are open, and then you can just scroll through that and pick what app you want to go to very quickly. So I find actually navigating on Snow Leopard with my Magic Trackpad to be very, very fast, and I'm a big believer in it. I think if people start using it, they'll get really good at it and see that in a way it's superior to using a mouse. Now, a mouse I do use when I'm doing heavy editing, let's say on a movie editor or a screen recording editor. One frustration I have with the Magic trackpad is that sometimes, the trackpad is only so big. I think it's 6 inches by 6 inches or so. And you want to drag across a 27-inch screen. Sometimes it's a little weird because you run out of real estate area on the trackpad to drag, and so you have to sort of pick up your hand and drag again. But what if you're holding something and you want to drag it to another folder? It's kind of weird. If you pick up your hand, you drop the thing that you're holding. So there are some little bugs in the Magic trackpad. So if you're a heavy computer user and you do a lot of editing, I would get both a mouse and the trackpad, the Magic trackpad. So those are the big changes between this year's model and last year's model of the iMac. Okay, if you're brave and really brave, you might want to try out the new download from Google of Google Chrome Canary. And what Google Chrome Canary is, it's a pre-developer version of the Chrome browser intended to be tested by, quote, the bravest of users. This is what MacNN says. And so if you're really into browsers on your Mac and like the current version of Chrome, you might want to play around with the Canary version. I guess it's called Canary because they put canaries in coal mines to see if the coal mine is leaking gas and will kill you. And so the beta version of Chrome just hit version 11, and the version for developers is marked 12. And the main selling point of Canary is that it can be run alongside an existing install of either the stable or beta builds of Chrome, or even off a disk image or USB flash drive, allowing users to retain the safe, stable version of their main browser use while checking out sites and plugins with Canary for signs of possible problems. So this is kind of cool, that you have this sort of portable version of Canary or of Chrome that you could put on the USB device that you just plug in. Now, Google warns you that the Canary release represents an untested build and is prone to instability. So I don't know. You might want to test it out. It sounds kind of interesting. Now, one sign of progress in iPhone and iDevices is that it looks like Apple may finally allow people the ability to download and update their iDevices without connecting to a computer. Right now, if you have an iPad or iPhone or any iDevice, if you want to upgrade the operating system of that device, you have to do it through iTunes on a computer, whether it's a PC or a Macintosh. Well, word comes out this week that Apple is in talks with Verizon to allow the next version of the iOS, called iOS 5, to update itself over the airways through Verizon's network to a iPhone. Now, it doesn't say, is this going to be limited to just cell phone upgrading, and it doesn't say anything about AT&T. And I imagine the reason why this hasn't been done previously, and this won't be available, by the way, till September, according to electronista.com. But I imagine that carriers like AT&T have resisted having iPhone updates over the cell phone connection because of the data. Like if Apple announces an update to the iOS on the iPhone, well, there's a good chance everybody will try to download it at the same time. And if that happens over the cell phone airways, it's prone to cause the cell phone connection on iPhone on AT&T to clog. But it's something that people want, because what if you don't have a computer and you get the iPhone? So having a computer limits the sales of the iPhone, because Apple could probably sell to a lot of people who don't have any computer but want to get an iPad or an iPhone. Right now, I guess what they could do if they want to upgrade is go to an Apple store and make an appointment with a Genius person and have Apple upgrade it. But a lot of people don't know that they can do that. So this seems to be a step in the right direction, and hopefully it'll also allow the ability to upgrade the operating system via Wi-Fi. Look, eventually we're going to have this. We're going to have the ability to not tether your iDevice to a computer. I mean, I find it a little frustrating. I'll give you one of my frustrations is that Apple limits in your ability to download files over 20 megabytes over cell phone connection. So if I'm out of podcasts and I'm not near a Wi-Fi area and I want to download a podcast over AT&T's network, Apple won't allow me, and this is kind of frustrating. You can't do it through the iTunes and the iPhone. And I mean, I think I understand at the beginning why Apple doesn't want to do it, because people don't have great cell phone data connections, and we certainly don't have the speed on cell phone data connections of downloading that we do on Wi-Fi, where we're connected up usually to a cable internet connection. On cable internet, I get, at home, I get 30 megabytes per second down over the AT&T airways. I'm lucky if I get 1.5 or 2 or 3 megabytes per second down. So, but this story is a huge indication that Apple is finally migrating to allowing over-the-air updates. Okay, so one nice upgrade that came from Apple this week was that Apple released an upgrade to iOS, now to version 4.3.3. And this update essentially solves the problem of the geocaching, which caused the whole controversy that now is requiring an Apple executive to testify before Congress, along with Google. So as you may remember, last week we talked about this whole controversy that came out of the fact that someone had discovered that Apple was creating a file on your iPhone or iDevice that cached sort of data regarding what cell phone towers you were near or what other geolocation stuff that you were near, caching it and then backing it up unencrypted in your iDevice backup on your computer through iTunes. Now, you had to go through many hoops to try to get this data and figure out if it meant anything, but it caused a lot of controversy. Some people were saying the sky was falling and that this was a disaster and your privacy was totally destroyed. But other people were pointing out, there's much more sensitive data on your iPhone. So if you leave it unlocked and someone gets it, they're going to get your emails. They're going to get other stuff. Anyways, Apple released a couple of days ago iOS 4.3.3, which basically deletes a lot of the geocaching and encrypts it on your iPhone and only saves like 1 week worth of the geocaching data. Now, the geocaching data is there so that when you do use GPS and location services on your iDevice, it makes it quicker to respond. Because if Apple generally has information as to where you've been in the last week and you're using location services and a GPS, it makes the response time much quicker. There's no indication that Apple used this to abuse the information, to sell it to advertisers or anything like that. It truly looks like it was just an engineering mistake to keep that data somewhere in some file deep in your iPhone. But you'd have to go through all sorts of hoops to get it off your iPhone. And now iOS 4.3.3 solves the problem. Well, another problem has been solved, and the problem solved is, what if you had jailbroken your iPhone and upgraded to iOS 4.3.3? Well, the crafty people who are in the jailbreak community, particularly the dev team, which is one of the big jailbreak people or groups, they released today, May 6th, an upgrade that to their jailbreaking tool that allows an untethered jailbreak for your iOS 4.3.3 device. And that jailbreak pretty much works for anything except the iPad 2. The iPad 2, currently no one has figured out an untethered jailbreak. Now, people not familiar with jailbreaking is a process where you use a third-party software to allow a non-Apple app store to be deposited on your iDevice. The typical, most prominent non-Apple app store is a store called Cydia, and Apple doesn't approve of this process, although the Library of Congress says that it's okay to jailbreak your iPhone, that it doesn't violate the law. So it's like this weird area, like, will Apple not support your iPhone if you jailbreak it? My experience has been the people in the Apple store who work there, they're familiar with jailbreaking. And if you just don't, it's like a don't ask, don't tell policy. If there's something wrong with your jailbroken iPhone, what I would do is restore it to factory settings, or just bring it in and say, look, it doesn't work, and act dumb if they ask about the jailbreaking. Pretty much anybody in Apple Store is going to try to fix your iPhone or iDevice. So the good news is if you want to update to iOS 4.3.3 and you have a jailbroken iPhone or a first generation iPad, you can do so now. Where you go is just do a Google search for dev-team, and I guess you can download what they call Red Snow. The O in Red Snow is a 0, and that'll do the trick. Okay, so Apple could become the first $1 trillion company, and what does that mean? Well, on May 3rd, I guess a financial analyst or investor named James Altshuler was on, from I guess Formula Capital, was on Yahoo Finance, and he was saying that in his opinion, Apple has continued room for growth, and that Apple could become the first $1 trillion market cap company. And what does that mean? Well, the market cap of a company is, if you took the price that the stock is trading at and multiplied that by the total amount of shares outstanding, that gives you the market cap. And what that means is that's what, if someone was going to buy the company at that price, the entire company, they would have to buy all the shares of the company and pay that traded price. And so Apple currently has a market cap of $320 billion. And why it's so controversial or important, what Altshuler is saying, is that currently Apple is the second largest company by market cap in the entire world. There's only one company that has a bigger market cap than Apple, and it's not a technology company. It's not Microsoft. It's not Hewlett-Packard. It's not Dell. It's not Google. It's Exxon. That's right, that behemoth, the oil company, Exxon, that has all this oil and gas and everything. That's the only company that's bigger in market cap than Apple. And what Altshuler is saying is that Apple could reach a market cap of $1 trillion, which is almost 3 times bigger than its current 320 billion market cap. And he makes some points which I agree with as to why he thinks there's still room for growth for Apple. First, he says that Apple stock price isn't really that high. And, his point is, look, well, first of all, the stock price is around $347 a share. That's not what people look to for stock price. They look at price to earnings, because the price can really be a function of how many shares outstanding. If Apple decided to, give you 2 shares for every 1 share you have now, that would drop the price of the stock in half, but you would have the same ownership of the company. So really, it's what is the price earnings ratio, the price of the stock to the earnings that Apple has. And currently, it's at a PE ratio of $16.52. But he says, really, is the price $347 a share? Because every 1 share of Apple also has built into it the cash that Apple has on reserve. Apple has an incredible cash reserve and stock reserve of like $60 billion, which is like $60-$70 on each share of stock. And so Alshuler is saying when you build that into it, actually the stock price is even lower than 347. I mean, think of it this way. If I said you could buy box A for $10 and you could buy box B for $10, you would say the boxes have the same price. But what if I told you that box B has $10 in it? Would you say that the price of buying box B with the $10 in it is $10? Well, that's the nominal price, but really you're getting the box for free because you're going to get the $10 back when you buy the box and open the box and get the cash. And that's what Alshuler is saying. That is the P ratio when you factor in the cash is probably lower than $16 price per earnings. The price is probably down to 13 or 12. And then he makes some points which I agree with as to the future growth of Apple. And look, I'm not giving any investment advice here because anything could happen tomorrow and Apple stock price could plummet. So I'm just commenting on Altshuler's analysis, and I agree with him that I think Apple has room for growth. Let's look at the different areas where its product lines are. iPhone is a huge product area for Apple, but the iPhone market, the smartphone market, has plenty of room to grow because smartphones, whether they're Google Android phones or any kind of smartphones, only make up a small percentage of all cell phones. And you're going to see more and more people who have cell phones who've never had a smartphone transition over to smartphones. And with Apple's 3GS iPhone being sold by AT&T at $50, with a 2-year contract, you're going to see more and more people switching over from cell phones to smartphones. Okay, so that's one product area. And then overseas, we're going to see just more and more people buying smartphones and buying iPhones, particularly in countries that have fast-growing economies and are gigantic like China and India and other countries. But let's look at the iPad. The iPad is an emerging market. Apple dominates it. Last year it sold 15 million iPads. This year it's projected to sell 45 million iPads. But a lot of people are going to be buying iPads in the future because it's an easier computing platform and just much more compelling than everyday computers. And so you're going to see people who currently have a computer or who never had a computer buying an iPad. And that's going to be a huge growth market because look, there's like 6 billion, 8 billion people in the world. Let's say the market for computers are 500 million people. Well, Apple could theoretically sell, 500 million iPads in the coming years. And, that's 10 times more than they're projected to sell this year. Similarly, Apple, to the extent there is a computer market, Apple for years had just a small slice of the computer market, which was dominated by Windows and Intel and Windows-based computers. And Apple still has under 10% of the traditional computer market in the United States. And a lot of people are switching to the Macs, whether they're the MacBook Airs or the iMacs or the MacBook Pros, because they're just a more compelling design and function, and because they've been exposed to the iPhone and the iPad, and that's drawing them into that. And finally, a fourth area for growth is the enterprise, which is business and government. And traditionally, Windows and Intel have had a lock on that business. And also for the smartphone area, RIM, the Canadian BlackBerry manufacturer, has really had a lock on businesses and government using computers and smartphones like RIM in there. And you didn't really see Apple products there. But with Apple's incredible success in everyday life for people with the iPad, the iPhone, and the Mac, you're seeing pressure on IT managers in enterprise settings like large companies, like the government, to start bringing in these Apple products like the iPad, the iPhone. And they're also going to be pressuring the IT people to bring in the Mac. And so, since Apple has such a small percentage of the enterprise market for computers and small smartphones, it has tremendous room to grow. So, look, I work in an enterprise setting, and there's no Apple computers here. There's like old, crappy Dell computers that are loud and make terrible noises, and we have really lousy BlackBerry devices. And my view is that Apple's going to peak when an enterprise like the one that I work in has all Apple products. If I see Apple products where I work everywhere, like everyone's using it in this enterprise that I work in, which is not in the technology area, then I'll know that Apple has peaked. Okay, so it looks like Apple's next Lion operating system is going to have something built into it that might hurt other apps or services like Instapaper. And this news comes via MacRumors.com, which I guess last Friday issued a story called Apple's upcoming reading list for Safari to compete with Instapaper in ReadItLater. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Instapaper. I've been using it. It's both a web service and also an app for the iDevices. And the web service is basically you get an account with Instapaper and you put a Read It Later button on your browser. And if you're reading some story, you press the Read Later button and it goes to your Instapaper account. And basically the story is saved and stripped of ads and formatted in a nice font so that you could read it, even if it's a lousy website that you're reading that has bad formatting and bad fonts. Instapaper reformats it, and you can read and organize the stories that you want to read later in Instapaper. But Instapaper is particularly powerful because you can, whatever you saved in your account on the cloud will then be synced to your Instapaper app on the iPad or the iPhone. The Instapaper app used to be free. There was a free version and a paid version. The paid version had more features, and currently there's just a paid version for $5. But it's a great service because like if there's a lot of stuff you want to read and you want to read it later, you just save it and sync it to Instapaper. Even if you don't have any internet connection, if it's in Instapaper on your iDevice, you can read it. Now, Apple has a read button that's built into the Safari browser currently that allows you to press the button and it reformats the text in a web page and strips it out of any ads, and you can read it and email it or print it in this nice form. Well, in the next version of Apple's operating system for the Mac, it looks like Apple is going to be offering some competition to things like Instapaper and readability. And Mac Rumors reported that Apple is working on a new feature for Safari, Lion, that will bring a different kind of bookmarking functionality to the browser. It's called Reading List and is meant to offer users a way to save pages for later reading. The new feature is described by Apple here, and it says, Reading List lets you collect web pages and links for you to read later. To add the current page to your reading list, click Add Page. You can also shift-click a link to quickly add it to the list. To hide and show Reading List, click the Reading List icon. So the big thing is you're able to add it to a list so you can read it later. Now, one of the things that it doesn't seem to have implemented, which make Instapaper great, is the ability to add it to folders. So I don't see that here because you might want to organize stories in your list in different folders by topic, and Instability offers that. And also the big thing is that there's nothing here that indicates that Apple in the immediate future intends to allow you to sync your reading list to iDevices, because that's Instapaper's forte, which is that you can be on your computer and save a story in the browser, and boom, it'll be in your Instapaper app. Similarly, you can also, save it in your browser on your iDevice too. So, it's interesting. Apple is obviously going to be looking at features that third-party developers have that are great, and think about incorporating them into the operating system or into its application. So I'm not surprised, and I think it's a good thing. But I think companies like Instapaper and Marco Arment, who I mentioned, who owns Instapaper and created it, thinks this will be good for Instapaper because it'll make more people interested in these save later reading lists, and they might want to upgrade to better features that Instapaper could offer. And I think he's absolutely right about that. Okay, the last story for today is something that addresses all the criticism and doomsdayer talk by some people regarding Apple's future and the future domination of the iPhone or the iPad. And it's a really great story that I'm going to tell you that was published, I guess, on a site called MondayNote.com by someone who long time ago was an Apple executive, and I guess oversaw the European operations of Apple, called Jean-Louis Gasset. And this is very well written. And his article is entitled Carnival Barker Edition, Show Me Your iOS Licensing Certificate. And his point is that there's all these journalists and tech people who are basically saying Apple is doomed. Apple is doomed to make the same mistake that it made in the 80s with the Macintosh, where it didn't license the Macintosh operating system to other people and then was overtaken by Windows and lost all its market share and almost went bankrupt. And comparing it, and Gasset's point is that they're wrong, that they have their facts wrong, and that what's going on now is different from then in many respects. But what's interesting is we've all heard why people like Henry Blodgett, Fred Wilson, and Dan Lyons are all wrong about saying that the way the iPhone is comparable to the Macintosh operating system. But Gasset makes a different point, which is they're also wrong about the history of what happened with the Macintosh because he was there at the time. So his point is that, look, the Macintosh, when it came out in 1984, already had big problems because IBM, which was the big gorilla, its PCs were out in 1982, 3 years before, or 1981, 3 years before the Macintosh comes out in 1984. And the IBM PC was superior to the Apple computer that preceded the Macintosh. So he points out, for example, that the original Apple computer, not the Macintosh, was only an 8-bit 6502 processor, while the PC that IBM made was a 16-bit processor. And he points out, more importantly, it had the IBM imprimatur, and it had a killer app, Lotus 123. And it was written in assembler running on a PCAT with a hard disk, and 123, the application was wicked fast. And the PC and its clones quickly prospered in the enterprise market. This is something that I've said for a long time, which is that the reason the Mac struggled, and even though it was a better computer than Windows or the PC that was pre-Windows, its problem was that Apple was a new company and the PC was sold in the enterprise, and that's where it dominated. And Gasset makes a lot of the same points. He says that the Mac didn't even get an external drive until 1986, and it was yet another year before it had a color monitor, a very nice color monitor, but a full 6 years after the PC. So a PC had a color monitor 6 years before the Macintosh. As for the Mac's killer apps, they didn't materialize as promised at the sales conference. The 123 Mac equivalent, Lotus Jazz, never quite worked. He goes on to say software publishing couldn't adapt its best-selling PFs suites to the Mac. Ironically, only Microsoft delivered software to the Macintosh. Its Mac spreadsheet Excel shipped in 1985, and Word came out about the same time. And it was late in 1984, he says, where they were treated to a demo of the Mac file server and Mac Office. These two never materialized. So his point is that, quote, so in effect, the Mac lost against an inferior product mantra is upside down. He says, in the all-important enterprise market, the Mac never stood a chance, with or without clones. Fortunately, the Mac's innate graphics capabilities and its great UI won over the more creative users. Thanks to Adobe, Aldus, and few others, the Mac got niched. So he's basically saying, and I agree with him, and I've been saying this too, which is that the premise that somehow the Mac, failed to really dominate in the computer industry because Apple didn't license the iOS or the OS of the Mac is not a good argument, because really why Apple floundered in the late 80s and 90s was because they couldn't get a foothold in the enterprise. And I'll make a point that Gissé doesn't make, which is most people who bought computers in the 1980s and 1990s did so because they were first exposed to a personal computer at work. Because the original personal computers were very expensive. They were $2,000, $1,500, and that was a lot of money back then in the late 80s and the 90s. And so people were exposed to computers at work, and they sure as hell wanted a computer that would be compatible with what they did at work at home if they were going to buy a computer. And the Mac operating system was not compatible, could not run programs that you could run at work. And so that, to me, was one of the major reasons that Apple struggled, was that the Mac could not get a foothold in enterprise and was not compatible at home with enterprise computers and software. And really, one of the major parts of Apple's turnaround, I think, is not only the iPhone and the iPad, but also that Apple has gone out of its way to work with Windows. Now think about this. When Apple switched to Intel Macs in mid-2000s, that meant you could now run Windows on a Mac as well as a Mac operating system. And Apple used that to market to people who were weaned on Windows computers. Similarly, Apple created iTunes for Windows, and so that the iPod could also run on Windows. So essentially, it's learned how to co-opt Microsoft's market and steal its customers. So, Gissé's article is really great. And with that note, I think we should end the podcast. Okay, thanks for listening to episode 70 of the Apple Podcast. This is May 6, 2011. This is Lex at MacsFuture.com. And if you enjoyed this commercial-free podcast and its contents, and you would like it to continue, please consider giving it a positive review in iTunes. It'll help other people hear this and find it. Consider giving it 5 stars, or any sort of positive feedback would be greatly appreciated. Until next week, this is Lex at Macs Future. Thanks for listening.